Hey guys, it's Whittingham back from vacation. Just a quick disclaimer before we start today's pod with Ethan and Chris Kouffman, aka CK, from 3 yards per carry. They taped this just a little bit before the frenzy of transactions the Dolphins have taken on in this free agent period. And so you're going to hear them talk about some things that have already happened, some storylines that have already come to fruition. So just keep that in mind as you listen to today's 5 Reasons podcast.
Welcome into the latest episode of the 5 Reasons podcast. I'm Ethan Skolnick, doing another episode without my partner, Chris Whittingham. As we're taping this, he is flying back from jolly old England, where I think he has actually taken up permanent citizenship. But Chris will be back to do a couple of episodes with me this week. We're going to be up in Jupiter for Marlins spring training. We got a couple of big guests planned up there. We'll also continue our 6 weeks of Wade series. I don't want to give away our guest this week, but it's a very, very good one. Also, check out, in addition to subscribing to our podcast, check out the other podcasts in our network. Miami Heat Beat Chamber podcast. Out for the Count is going to start posting again this week. Obviously, we've got swings and misses up there at Marlins spring training. The best Marlins coverage you will certainly find in the area. Goldie on Ice getting back on it this week too, about sort of the Panthers' future, because this season hasn't gone how they expected. But today, my co-host, you can usually hear him on 3 yards per carry, which is one of our most popular podcasts. They're almost at a year now, Chris. I was looking at it the other day. I think you guys started with us like the last week of March. So we're almost at the 1-year anniversary. You can find him on Twitter at CK Parodies. Chris Kouffman. You hear him with Simon Clancy and Alfredo Artiega every week, or during the season, 2 times a week during the season, once a week during the off season. And Chris, what we're going to do today is we're going to try to go through free agency as best we can as it applies to the Dolphins. We understand things are fluid. We're going to try to cover some things that will last a little bit longer here, but obviously by the time you listen to the podcast, it is possible that some things have changed. But I want to throw this question at you before we get to I'm going to try that word again. Before we get to specifics, you can leave that on the podcast. Before we get to specifics about who the Dolphins may go after and who they may let go, I want to get into a philosophical discussion with you, because I've talked about this with Whittingham quite a bit. And we've played around with this word tanking that was floated clearly by someone very high up in the organization to some media people to try to get that out there. I know that your partner, Simon Clancy, hates that word. I don't think it's really what the Dolphins are doing, actually. Can you talk about what you think they are doing and why that even got out? Because it clearly got out from people who wanted it to get out from inside the Dolphin organization.
There was actually a rumor, if you listen to or read Dave Hyde of the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, he said that some of these rumors, especially about the 2020 quarterbacks and how they're not going to focus on any quarterbacks this year and it's going to be 2020, came from Adam Gase himself, sort of outgoing. And you do wonder about that, because he was outgoing and he certainly has no love for Miami, I don't think, as he was fired here. But I don't know. It could have been as you've implied several times, which is that let's get it out there so that the expectations aren't high. It could have also been Steve Ross, he waffles back and forth on things. He's like a fan. This week he thinks this way, the next week he thinks another way, and he talks a lot. He talks a lot with his people. Especially as, you know, he has a whole life outside of the Miami Dolphins. He's with RSE Ventures, and he has people in his inner circle there, and he talks with people from everything that I've heard, because I know that several of these sources that speak to the media in South Florida are connected through Steve Ross's other ventures. And so he talks to people, and when he's thinking something this week, he says something to them, and then those people go on and talk, and then that's how that gets out there. But I think what I took from that first press conference was just that everything that they do in the offseason has to have a 2020 or 2021 to it. It doesn't. It wasn't that they were just going to try to lose games, as has been portrayed in the media, as we've seen over the last month or two. I think it's more about, okay, we're going to sign this guy, but how does this help us in 2020? You know, we're gonna draft this guy. How does this help us in 2020 through 2023? I don't think it's about, I've seen it several times. We're running down a list, and for instance, the quarterback position. Well, we don't want to sign this guy because he might win us too many games next year. I don't think that's it. I don't think that's what they're looking at. I think that that's actually kind of ludicrous of an exercise to go down, because at that point, why sign anybody? You just have Luke Falk or Jake Rudock be the quarterback from then on. If the point is to lose, then you don't sign anybody. The point of signing somebody is to get better. So I don't, if you're not trying to be better, there are people trying to walk this weird tightrope, I think. And I don't think it's realistic. I don't think that's what's actually happening.
Yeah, and look, there are quarterbacks out there who could win you a few games, but not enough, right? Like, so like one name that's come up a couple times is like Ryan Fitzpatrick, right? So Ryan Fitzpatrick does the same thing with every team he's with. He's hot, right? He starts hot, really hot sometimes. I mean, he did it in Buffalo. He did it in Tampa. I mean, he's done this repeatedly. And then all of a sudden the picks start to come, right? So it's like, he'll win you a few games early and then not later. I'm with you on this. I don't think that they're going to start the quarterback start the season with Falk or Rudock at quarterback. I think there's going to be somebody else in the mix, whether it's a drafted guy, maybe it's not a high pick, because we're going to talk a little about Kyler Murray and kind of what's going on there. But maybe it's not a high pick, but maybe it's a later pick. Maybe again it's a journeyman who's here for 1 year to kind of rehabilitate his career. Maybe becomes the backup to whoever the quarterback is drafted in 2020, possibly. But I don't think they're just going to go with sort of slop together what they have currently, because and here's the big thing about this to me, CK, they still have to sell tickets. Like, and this town, I mean, and Chris and I have had this discussion, Whittingham and I, about how long the town will tolerate it, and the question comes up because it's not like things have been good, and Dolphin fans have generally stuck around. But if you were at the stadium, as I was for the last 4 games of last season, there were a ton of empty seats, and you still have to fill a place. And I think they benefited somewhat by the fact that there's no passion right now for what the other teams are doing. But ultimately, fans are going to make a decision whether or not it's worth paying to go on a Sunday afternoon and watch, the 32nd best quarterback in the NFL. So I do think that Ross, it's one of those things. It's like you say, it's like you're going, you're going to have a diet, right? Like, and what the end result you want is, okay? And so you're like, okay, if I have to starve myself, if I have to completely, I'm not just going to swear off chocolate, okay? I'm going to swear off everything. I'm going to swear off steak. I'm going to swear off chicken. I'm going to swear off, the vegetables, whatever it is, I'm going to swear it off to get there. And then, you're a few days into it, and you're like, what the hell did I just do? And I kind of feel like the Dolphins, might be starving themselves this season, or might have looked at that. But I don't know that you can actually go through with it in this town. So how long do you think the Dolphin? I mean, you're on the message boards. You've been for years. You're on Twitter. Where is the Dolphin fan right now? Do you think they have the patience for this?
I think the Dolphin fan has been in much the same place for a while, in my opinion. And there's been an evolution, obviously, from, say, the Wannstedt days when the fan was used to winning, just not used to winning a lot or winning at all or competing for an actual championship. And now they're just kind of used to being 8-8 or 7-9 or 6-10. But either way, the level of sort of, for lack of a better word, bitchiness seems about the same. So I don't know. I don't know if there's. I never want to be extreme, like saying, hey, we're right on the precipice of the fan leaving. Because it's been this way for a while, and it's been 2 decades since the Dolphins have really done anything worth writing about. And so I think that, that could be another 2 decades, really. Who knows? So I don't try to get extreme about it, but I think that when it comes to this tanking thing, which I don't think is really happening. It's really about in the off season, every single thing that they do probably having to have a 2020 outlook to it. And that includes a quarterback. If they go out and sign a Ryan Fitzpatrick at quarterback, they have to be saying to themselves, either Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to help us beyond 2019 in 2020 in some way. He's going to continue playing. He's not so old that this is going to be his last year, and he's going to improve the room going forward. Or Ryan Fitzpatrick is such a great veteran presence and such a smart guy that he will help us to establish that quarterback room in 2019. And then whatever young players are with him in that quarterback room will take that forward into 2020 and beyond. And that's possible. That's possible with Ryan Fitzpatrick. I don't think he's probably the best guy for that. I think that there might be, if they're aiming for that, they might be leaning toward Josh McCown as the option. But I mean, that's what you have to look at. You have to look at everything through the lens of this is not about 2019. We don't care about those wins. And there are certain advantages that you have when you don't care about 2019. I'll just throw a very simple one out there with respect to defensive tackle Jeffrey Simmons of Mississippi State, who is a very high-ranked player. I mean, he's a very highly rated player. However, he tore his ACL like a month ago in workouts. And if you don't care about 2019, then what you do is you trade down, get some extra picks, and then you take him knowing that in 2020 and beyond, you've got a top 10 talent, but you've also got those extra picks because you traded down. Now, if you cared about 2019, you're going to think again about that. You're going to say, well, I don't know that we can afford to do this because, how can we take our first round pick and just give them the red shirt and not expect anything out of them in 2019? Right. So, not caring about 2019 has a specific intent and purpose of allowing you to arbitrage opportunities. And I think that's what they're going for. I don't think they're going for, well, this guy might win us too many games and then we're out of luck. I don't think that's the mindset.
Yeah, I was at an OJ McDuffie event in Davie. He had his annual bowling event, and Marino's there, and JT's there, and Sertana's there, and Timbo made an appearance, it was nice to see him, and Troy Drayton, and all these other guys have been there through the years. And I'm just looking around that room, and I'm just thinking, how much talent has this organization squandered over the past 30 years? It's just remarkable. Because
the jerseys haven't changed though either.
Well, that's the thing. If you go to a Dolphins game now, you're seeing the guys from the 90s and the 2000s. There's just a dead spot, right? That we've had since the last playoff win, and after the 2000 season and Lamar Smith. We're talking almost 2 decades. Just looking around the room, they had really good players who went nowhere.
It was the Clinton administration, literally.
Basically, right. I mean, just went and all these guys just went nowhere. And so I do understand a pivot in philosophy. That part of it I get. I just wonder, as you're saying, maybe it just is about 2020, but I wonder sometimes if the pivot in philosophy is basically just giving yourself a cushion. It's saying, getting it out there, we're not going to be very good this year. Okay, got to be patient. I know that there's been some concern about the idea that they hired, a staff that was very diverse, and I give tremendous credit to Steve Ross for that, for doing what other NFL teams are not doing, which is giving opportunities to qualified African-American and other minority candidates. So give credit to Steve Ross for that. I know one of the concerns was if you're going to be bad intentionally, if that's what we're talking about, then you're setting up your group for failure, and we just saw what happened to Steve Wilkes in Arizona. So I don't think he wants to do that. Like you said, I just think it's floating it out there to make it clear, okay, we understand we're not positioned to contend for a championship or even an AFC championship this year. So just sort of hang with us. And like you said, every decision made has 2020 in mind. I do want to focus back before we get into some of the players they may look at. And I know Trey Flowers and then the signing of Dwayne Allen. We'll touch on all that. But I want to get into the players that are currently on the Dolphin roster, CK. So, and what if we're talking about a 2020 context, okay? You and I both talk about this a lot. I've talked about it for years and years and years, that there are 4 core positions in football that you have to address, and that's where the big money goes. And this is why I've never understood throwing a lot of money at an Ndamukong Suh, who doesn't play one of those positions, or some of the other positions that the Dolphins have addressed over the years, okay? But it is quarterback, it is left tackle, it is corner, and it is pass rusher. And the Dolphins are going to basically let go of a pass rusher in Cam Wake, who's still playing at a high level, albeit at an advanced age. They whiffed on Charles Harris, it appears, who should be sort of ascending into that spot. They've got a cornerback who is elite, established himself as elite over the past sort of season and a quarter in Xavier Howard. They have to decide whether they want to pay him. They have a left tackle who is getting into the elite space in Laramie Tunsil. It looks like they hit on that pick, but he's also due an extension with Jimmy Sexton as his agent. And then we've talked about the quarterback hole. What do they do with the 2 guys that we know can play at 2 important positions? When you're looking at 2020, do you extend Xavier Howard, do you extend Laramie Tunsil, or do you trade them?
I think that they're going to extend them. I mean, I don't think at this point that that's even speculation. I think that that's their intention. They intend to extend both Laramie Tunsil at left tackle as well as Xavier Howard at corner. And to go within your framework, let's say they do go out and bid high and win out on a Trey Flowers, then they've just assembled 3 of your 4. So I think that's, if you're talking about that classic framework, and I think it is a very classic approach to building the roster. And it reminds me of, I believe, Mike Holmgren when he took the Seattle Seahawks to the Super Bowl against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It always struck me the very classic manner in which he built that roster. Using those sorts of cornerstone pieces. And if the Dolphins do get Trey Flowers and they keep Xavier Howard and Laramie Tunsil, then they have 3 of those 4. And then they're going to focus on figuring out and finding the right quarterback for 2020, the 2020 draft. That doesn't mean that they won't take a guy in 2019, but let's say it's going to be a guy that improves the quarterback room, not necessarily a headliner. 2020, now you might be thinking, okay, but yeah, you take a guy in 2020, he's not going to win right away. He's not going to, well, actually, a lot of these guys are ready to win right away. I mean, if you look at the success stories out there, the quarterbacks that are considered to be successful elite level franchise quarterback picks, probably 80% of them actually did something pretty impressive as rookies if they played as rookies. And that's one of the reasons, I mean, we can get into the Josh Rosen thing later, but one of the reasons I'm a little bit of a skeptic on him is because those success stories, 80% of them, if they played as rookies, they showed something really promising. And they won right. Cam Newton won right away with Carolina Panthers. Or he took their offense from 32nd in the league to being a top 10, top 5 type of offense overnight. And I think that if you get the right young franchise level quarterback, yeah, it can happen right away. And it certainly can happen by that second year, by 2021, for example. So I don't think we're getting this, Xavier Howard and Laramie Tunsil are already going to be old by the time we're ready to compete because we don't have the quarterback yet. I think the future happens now a lot with these young quarterbacks, especially when they're dynamic, as you would hope that to be getting one of those guys.
Yeah, sorry. So let's say that they do extend them, and I agree. I think both guys you do. I think the Dolphins have made some mistakes over the years by not extending certain guys. We can have conversations about whether they made like sort of the right call on a guy like Olivier Vernon a few years ago.
Right.
Again, we're talking about different regime and a different philosophy, but I think you have to extend both. Look, the Dolphins have struggled so much to find blue chip players. The idea that they're going to walk away from them in their early to mid 20s, to me, is just ludicrous. I mean, then I don't know what you sell the fans at that point. I mean, we're talking about Charles Harris, complete whiff, Devontae Parker, complete whiff, right? I mean, for guys who are supposed to, because number 1 receiver is supposed to be sort of, I guess, the 5th position there, and the Dolphins
probably, yeah.
Yeah, and the Dolphins have not been able to find that guy who makes everybody better, and they drafted Parker to be that. He wasn't that, hasn't been that, and is not going to be here. So I think you have to extend both guys. I know you did a Patreon episode on this, but I want to give you a chance here. Do you have any issue with them walking away from Cam Wake? At
this point, no. If you've given up on, because he is this old, I mean, he's pretty advanced in age, and if you've given up on 2019 to the point, not that you're trying to lose 2019, it's just that you're not attaching value to the 2019 story with everything that you do. And if that's the case, then you don't really sign Cameron Wake back because you can't even assume that he'll be playing in 2020. So I think that they're probably doing the right thing. He's going to go off to a contending team, I'm sure, because that's who he will appeal to, is a team that believes that they're contending. And he'll do well there because he's still an excellent pass rusher. He's a very efficient pass rusher. He pressures the quarterback at an extreme rate. Even in 2018, he did that. And maybe his snap counts are going to be more in the 500 territory than the 700 territory by the end of the year. But he's still a productive player that way. He's been a model player. He's never been a vocal player. But I think that they're probably doing the right thing.
Yeah. So if they don't have him, and let's look at some of the rest of the roster who have not sort of emerged yet, because I think that affects some of the decisions they make here in free agency. So your quick dial down on a couple of guys here: Charles Harris, Mike Gesicki.
Charles Harris, I have my doubts about, because even in the defense that we just went away from, the wide 9 sort of defense with Chris Kouffman as the defensive line coach, teaching this sort of all-out, no hesitation style, just, explode off the snap, get up the field, and then start to work your way back to the ball. Even in that, he wasn't taking to it because there's a little bit too much hesitation in this game. There's a little bit too much thinking in his game. And so now he's going to a different defensive style where they are charged with using their eyes a little better and a little more smartly. And I think that could be a recipe for disaster for him, really. So I don't have a lot of hope for him. Mike Gesicki's a little bit different, though. Mike Gesicki as a tight end, first off, he did have production as a rookie. It's not as if he was blanked out. But he wasn't used the way – listen, anybody that watched the guy in college, anybody's grandmother that watched the guy in college could probably draw you a rough napkin map of how he's supposed to be used. You don't necessarily want him in your classic tight end position outside of the offensive tackle's shoulder and, blocking a whole bunch and pass protecting and doing all this stuff. And yet that's what Adam Gase had the guy doing. I mean, he had him pass protecting on probably like 19% of pass plays. He had him outside the tackle's shoulder on the line about 44% of the time. These are too high for him. We're looking at a set of coaches that had Aaron Hernandez in 2011, 2012, and they had Aaron Hernandez sitting in to pass protect 4% of the time, a quarter of the time that, less than a quarter of the time that Mike Gesicki was. They had Aaron Hernandez off the tackle's shoulder like something like 13% of the time. I mean, they knew what to do with Aaron Hernandez, okay? They knew what kind of player he was and what they needed him to do. Now they're going to be in Miami, and they're going to be looking at Mike Gesicki, and they're probably going to see similar players to be used in a similar manner, and we're not going to see as much of the wasted plays that we saw last year with Mike Gesicki. But all this is sort of predicated, and this is why the Dwayne Allen signing ended up being important. All this is predicated. Aaron Hernandez had Rob Gronkowski with him the entire time. Right. And it was important that he have Rob Gronkowski with him the entire time because the Patriots needed to have somebody that could take care of that role before they could start to use Aaron Hernandez off of the formation and in the slot and all these different positions. They needed to take care of that first, and Rob Gronkowski gave them that ability. In Miami, now what have they done? They had Durham Smith and they had Nick O'Leary, but they didn't trust those guys to increase their usage and really nail that on-the-line position down so that they can use Gesicki the way that they need to. So they went ahead and signed Dwayne Allen, who they know from his experience in New England and these coaches' experience with him, they know that he can do that. And so now they have a fair confidence that they've got that on the line, off the tackle shoulder position taken care of, the Y position taken care of. And now they can use Gesicki the way he was always meant to be used. So I think the arrow is up for him. Charles Harris is the opposite direction. The arrow is down to me.
All right, and one more here before we move to the guys they may look at. Raekwon McMillan.
I think that he's actually going to do pretty well in this. One thing about the linebackers in the last defense that they had is there was a lot of pressure on those linebackers. Belichick has talked about this some with respect to why he has certain defensive linemen two-gapping or does some of the defensive approaches that he does. When you do the math as far as fitting everybody into gaps, somebody has to two-gap. And in a 3-4 defense or in a defense that has defensive linemen two-gapping, then you've got those big, strong bodies with two-gap responsibility up front. And that means that the linebackers don't have to do that. In the 4-3 or in defense like Miami's last year, the linebackers have to two-gap, have to be responsible for, or at least one linebacker has to be responsible for two gaps. And Bill Belichick doesn't like having linebackers responsible for that, and it puts them at a disadvantage. I think that the moving to this style of defense, and they're not always going to have defensive linemen two-gapping up front, but moving to this style of defense puts less pressure on the linebackers than in the style of defense that we had before. Because the style of defense that we had before, they really had to move forward on the attack and then go at a disadvantage on the pass defense. And I think that things are going to be different in this style of defense. So that benefits Raekwon McMillan. He is a heavier guy. He's strong. He's a good run stopper. I think this is particular. If you look at the linebackers that Bill Belichick has had in New England over the time, they're not fast. None of them are fast. And every Bleacher Report writer since God knows when, every time they're doing a preview of their team against the Patriots, they always have the answer. It's like, aha, they have slow linebackers and slow defensive ends. Well, we need to hit them on the edges, and we need to take advantage of these slow linebackers in coverage. Yeah, everybody's got that idea because they're not fast. But that's the way this defense is structured. It doesn't need to be. And Raekwon McMillan is not necessarily a fast guy. He's not Jerome Baker. So the arrow is actually up for him. This is the style of defense that's going to work for him. Actually, the guy I wonder about is Jerome Baker, who started out hotter in 2018. And now I wonder about his role a little bit in 2019.
Yeah, it's interesting because he is the guy, if you look at the last sort of 6 weeks of the season, that when you looked at this draft class, you're like, oh, he's popping. And that's not what we saw with Gesicki. Baker had obviously the moment against the Jets, but also I thought as the season went on, he looked more and more comfortable, whereas McMillan, to me, and again, your eye is more trained than me, but looked to be constantly out of position. I thought that Baker at least sort of looked like he knew where he needed to be, whereas Raekwon really didn't look like that. The other thing I think to consider with Raekwon is he's going to be another year removed from the injury, and I think that kind of got looked past a little bit last year.
Very true.
Yeah, it takes a year and a half to 2 years.
2 years. That's what they always say. Second year back from the major knee construction.
Right. So I think that'll be a little different. All right, so let's look at some of the players that they've either pursued or that they're bringing in. Obviously, they've cut Danny Amendola loose. I don't think that's a big surprise. Now there's some talk that Gore may not come back. Also, if we're talking about 2020, I'd like to see Frank back just because of what he adds to the room and to the team, but I would get that one also. But let's look at the you mentioned Dwayne Allen. There appears to be, like you said, a clear philosophical reason for that, and I get it. Let's look at wide receiver, because if Parker's not going to be here, and I think that's pretty much a foregone conclusion, if Amendola is not going to be here, that's already done. You're looking at the receivers from last year, and you've got a guy that you really like in Jakeem Grant, who wasn't used, all that much last season before he got hurt, and so now there's a timetable with him. You've got Albert Wilson, who I think we both really like for a lot of different reasons, and that was really emerging for them when he got hurt. And he says he's ahead of schedule, and he's posted a lot of things on social media. I actually saw him about a month ago, and he also said he was ahead of schedule. So hopefully that's the case. But, again, you don't know what his return is going to look like. And then you've got Kenny Stills, who to me was horribly underutilized last season. I mean, just ignored in a lot of games. And maybe it was the quarterback, maybe it was the coaching staff. I don't know, but Kenny was not as involved as he would have been. Do they address wide receiver in any way, considering we're talking about just three guys and two of them are coming off major injuries? Do they address wide receiver in any way in free agency?
I have a feeling they're not going to. And if they do, it's probably going to be getting somebody like Riley McCarron or somebody that's way down on the depth chart in New England, and they're just inviting him over as part of this transition team. I mean, if they really wanted to, we know that the New England Patriots were really high on Randall Cobb, and we now have a bunch of those New England Patriots coaches in Miami. So you never know if all of a sudden, if Randall Cobb's name just shows up all of a sudden, that would be why. But I don't think so. I know that the staff in Miami were high on Brashad Perriman when he came out of school, and he's a free agent now. Devontae Parker's obviously leaving, but there was some thought within the staff to trading down in that draft and targeting Brashad Perriman and picking up extra picks instead of taking Devontae Parker. So, he's probably not going to cost anything, right? So that maybe something like that. But otherwise, I don't think so. I think that Albert Wilson is going to be a featured guy, more of a featured guy. Jakeem Grant, they definitely have in mind to utilize him. They might even trade Kenny Stills or otherwise get rid of him. We don't know that yet. And I think that they're going to build other pass-catching positions like, you've seen them build with Dwayne Allen, and part of that is to spring Mike Gesicki loose. I think that the running backs catch 50% more passes in New England than they do in Miami. And so you're going to look at the running back position. Kenyon Drake, we know he's a good receiving threat, and we have seen good things in college out of Kalen Ballage, and he made a few plays as pass catcher last year as well. But we don't know if he's one of those real, super strong pass catching guys. So they might add a name there. They might add a name. We've heard about, the Cleveland Browns have been offering Duke Johnson around the league. And we think that the Miami Dolphins could be interested in that. And I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised to start building the ancillary pass catching positions before they really hone in on the wide receivers position. And that's why I think that they're not going to do much in free agency there. And they might even, minus out a guy that you just talked about with Kenny Stills.
All right, before we cycle back to quarterback, we're going to get back to that last. Want to look at the defense here. So they add Trey Flowers. Let's just say that they do that. They decide to extend Xavier Howard. They don't cut Rashad Jones loose. They've got Minkah Fitzpatrick. They're bringing back Baker and McMillan, and I guess Kiko, right? I mean, what would be the status of Kiko at this stage? Because I know last year it was really complicated to sort of get rid of him, and then he had a weird season where he was either really, really good or really, really bad. Like there was not a lot of in between.
It was such a microcosm for what the Dolphins were last year, right? Because they won 7 games, and
I don't know how.
And nobody knows how.
I don't know how. I mean, they were a 4.5 wins based on their metrics, basically.
And yet, and Kiko was part of that. All right, Kiko played awesome in the games that they won, and he made plays. In fact, in some of those games that literally you could isolate the play and say, yeah, that was probably the difference in the game. And yet, you get rid of Kiko, and it's like, well, I guess without Kiko, they would have been that 4-win team,
right?
And that's mind-boggling because you're like, he wasn't that good, but. I think he actually plays the game in a way that they appreciate. And so they would like to keep him, all things being equal. But I do think that they're going to want to edit and take a look at his contract and get him to play ball on a pay cut of some sort. I think that some of the things that they need to do, this defense needs to transition. There are 3 levels of transition for the defense. There's on the back end and the secondary, you need a whole lot of new bodies there. Mm-hmm. And you need guys that are good at man coverage and guys that are pretty fast because they need to be good at man coverage all the way around. Mm-hmm. And they don't have enough bodies there. The Patriots, we said this on the pod many times, the Patriots are a team that will play dime, maybe a third of the time, and then play quarter, which is 7 defensive backs on the field at the same time. Maybe 1 out of 10 plays or 1 out of 12 plays or something like that. So, and they only play base, the 4 defensive back package, they only play base like something like 12%, which is ridiculous. So what Miami needs, Miami was the opposite kind of team. Miami was, we're either in base like 35% of the time or we're in nickel with 5 defensive backs the other 65% of the time. Now they need more defensive backs because they're going to use more defensive backs. So they need bodies there. They need bodies in the secondary in order to fill up the dime and quarter defenses and make sure they can keep going even if somebody gets hurt and misses a game here and there. On the linebacker level, they don't have any of the sort of linebackers that Donta Hightower and Kyle Van Noy were, which is sort of like inside-outside guys. They line up in the box as real stacked linebackers half the time, and then the other half of the time they're on the line as an outside, as like a 3-4 outside linebacker pass rushing or something like that. We don't have those bigger bodies like that there. So, somewhere that's going to happen, probably via the draft. And then the other transition is on the defensive line. And the first thing you do there is with a Trey Flowers, make sure that you've got that inside-outside pass rusher. And then the second thing is they need somebody with just really powerful, heavy hands, like sort of a nose tackle type. And that's where we think that they could be interested in Malcolm Brown of the New England Patriots, who's a free agent. We've heard that they're interested in him. He's sort of a young guy. I believe they drafted him maybe toward the end of the first round or the second round or something like that. So they drafted him high. He's made it to free agency. He's always had somebody kind of ahead of him, whether it's Lawrence Guy or Danny Shelton, a guy that they traded for. So we think that they're going to get sort of a heavier, puncher there in Malcolm Brown. And then they've got those transitions on the linebackers and then the secondary to make.
So the back 7, like you're talking about, if you're hoping you get something from Charles Harris, maybe they can hit on a pass rusher at some point in the draft who can kind of add to the rotation. But you look at the back 7, you mentioned bodies, and I've heard you guys talk about this on the podcast. The Patriots would have 7 or 8 playable guys. The Dolphins have, by my count, 4, I guess, with Rashad. And again, that you're still establishing what Minkah's position is going to be. So you've got, Rashad, you've got, for however long it lasts, you've got Minkah, you've got obviously Howard, and you've got McCain. And that's really it because, it looks like you missed on Tankersley. McTyer was a disaster last year. So you don't have these extra guys. I guess the one question I would have is if they just add Trey Flowers and they've gone from Matt Burke to Brian Flores and people he's comfortable with, just that alone, like all you do is add Trey Flowers. You have the same 3 linebackers, basically. You try to add to the depth. Virtually the same D-line. You don't have Cameron Wake. You don't have Robert Quinn, but it's like they played without Robert Quinn for the last 12 weeks of last season anyway. You're right. You've got the same 4 DBs, and you're going to add a little bit of depth there. This be a top – because I've heard your colleague Alfredo argue often that there's top 12 talent on this defense, right? Top 12 in the league in terms of defensive efficiency numbers and all those things you look at, but that Matt Burke just didn't coach it right. Is it possible that just Trey Flowers and Brian Flores is enough to make this a top 12 defense?
I wouldn't argue that it is, personally. I think that if you've got transitions to make, even forgetting whether you've got the ideal coaching or not, which is always the question, you just hired these guys. Are they actually good? For taking that aside, the talent that you've built, the talent that you've got was sort of built into this previous system. And now you've got a new system. And as I just said, there's 3 levels of transition to make from a personnel and from a structural standpoint, as far as what kind of talents that are good at what. You've got to make those transitions before you can even run the defense the way that it's supposed to be run. And they haven't even started on step 1 of that. You obviously have some work to do in the linebackers. You have a lot of work to do in the secondary, because I agree with you. Right now there's 4 guys, and one of them is, arguably 2 of them play slot corner, and that's Minka Fitzpatrick and Bobby McCain. And that's not quite structured the right way. No, you need a whole lot more bodies on the defensive secondary, and you need to start seeing some better transition, or start seeing and fleshing out how that transition is going to happen in the linebackers before you can start, saying, because even the Patriots defense wouldn't be like top 12 in yardage. They would be top 12 in points allowed.
Bend but break is what we've always talked about with them, right? Like that's been a consistent thing, is they stiffen when you get to the 20, basically.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. And because they play a smart defense. They play a smart defense. They're situational, and they wait for situations where they've got you, and then they get you off the field.
Right.
And that's what the style of defense is about. And before you've got the talent that can do what you need it to do in those situations, it can look rough. So this could be a rough transition in 2019. You got to look at what they do on the whole in the draft and in free agency. But right now, no, I don't see it being a top defense.
All right, so let's move to the last thing here, and it's we touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's what everybody wants to know. So real quick here, your quarterback from the Miami Dolphins on opening day 2019 is?
If I were a betting man, I'd say Josh McCown.
Wow.
I think that.
How old is Josh these days? 38?
43? I don't know. I know that he still dunks a basketball, apparently. There's video out there on Twitter of him at this age, like balling out on the court. He's actually amazing. He's a good athlete. I mean, this is going to be just like 2008, right? Remember 2008, Bill Parcells got here. It's all rebuilding. It's ripping up the roster, starting fresh, starting with all these new bodies. And Josh McCown is supposed to be the quarterback. Yep. And that was 2008.
11 years ago. Well, here's how long I've been doing this. I was in Mobile when Dan Marino interviewed Josh McCown coming out in the draft. I remember them walking to a room together. That's how, because that would be about right? Because it was Danny was 2000. Well, I saw it today, by the way, and he stopped aging at a certain point. Like he's stuck.
That's right.
He's just stuck in time. I'm watching him interact with JT, and again, I'm thinking these guys never won a Super Bowl. One of them.
JT certainly never ages.
No. He looks exactly.
He looks exactly.
He could get 6 sacks right now. I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Pretty clear on that. But yeah, I remember. Yeah, it would have been 2004 because it was Dan took the job that he didn't know what it was. And was on a bench in Mobile in the rain watching offensive line prospects and quit about 4 days later. But he interviewed Josh McCown. That's how long this has been. It's Marino's last term here. It wouldn't stun me. I guess let me just give you 2 more names here, and you let me know if you think there's any possibility to them. Bridgewater. Do you see that at all? Is there any chance of that for this group? I
do, if for no other reason than I'm pretty sure that Teddy Bridgewater wants to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And we have that. I mean, Alf has that from Teddy's father himself. Teddy wants to be here, and if Ryan Tannehill is no longer here, then he will be lobbying for this job. Mm-hmm. The question is, will that work from a financial standpoint? And last year, Teddy Bridgewater was making $6 million, and I think even that number might be too high for Miami. Everybody thinks that number is, everybody last year were talking about that number as if it were going to double, even though he hadn't played in 2018. And then when he did play in 2018, finally in week 17, he honestly wasn't very good. So, I can't see that number actually getting much bigger the way that everybody says it's going to be. but the number may actually have to get smaller in order for Miami to take on it. And so he's just going to listen. Miami has the only job in the league, the only starting job in the league that's up for grabs.
Right.
If you look around the league, nobody else has. And so you're talking to guys like Tyrod Taylor, Teddy Bridgewater, Ryan Tannehill in a few moments. And several other guys that want to be a starter. If these are guys that aren't old and think that all I need in order to be known as a starter and be coveted as a starter is that chance,
right,
the chance to actually get on the field and play, then these guys should be saying, hey, I'll play for $2 million as long as you make me a starter and you give me that chance. And then I'm betting on myself at that point because I'll succeed and then I'll be known as a starter. And that's when I'll make $12 million plus.
Right.
So Teddy Bridgewater and those guys should be offering to take a low deal for Miami. And if they do, then maybe they are in the game for Miami. But if they don't, then I think the Miami is probably just going to go a different direction from those guys. But Teddy, I know, wants to be there.
Right, and that's the big piece of this. All right, so let's skip over the other guys. Let's get to the guy you mentioned. Where is Ryan Tannehill next season?
Well, at first I thought it was going to be the Washington Redskins. Then it just traded for Case Keenum. I mean, Ryan's people thought it was, or the indications I had were that Ryan's people thought that it was going to be the Washington Redskins. Now the indications that I have are that either the New York Giants or the Dallas Cowboys could be interested, but clearly at this point he's looking at a backup position, and nobody is going to even give him really the chance to say, hey, it's 50-50. You just got to win the starting job from this guy.
Mm-hmm.
No, he's a backup at this point. A backup's wages are like $6 million at the high end. So he's probably got some realities to face as far as how much money he's going to make. And he's going to be looking at one of those teams that already have a quarterback and he can just play the backup. And I think that several of them out there, that you can include Cincinnati in there since he's got the Zach Taylor connection. But I think I've heard, New York Giants and maybe Dallas Cowboys, something like that. At this point, though, it's really wide open because it's so well acknowledged that he's just going to be a backup.
It's amazing. The same thing. It's like Chad Henne all over again. It's repeated itself where we sit. It wasn't as long with Chad as it was with Ryan, but it's like we sit here arguing over somebody for 4 years and then he's just gone. I mean, it's like, okay. I mean, we're not even planning like a special Tannehill episode. He'll just be gone. He'll sign somewhere else. You won't see him play for 3 weeks. Starting quarterback will get hurt somewhere. Ryan will get a couple of starts. So that used to be Ryan Tannehill. Like, it's amazing to me. And this is not to disrespect him at all because I have enormous respect for his toughness and kind of, some of what he put up with here in terms of the changing coaching staffs and the changing schemes and everything else. And I wanted him to succeed. But it is kind of remarkable. He was here for 7 years and made like no impact. Like, I'm not saying he didn't make any in the community because I know he and his wife did good things in the community, but like, I still don't even know who Ryan Tannehill is. Like, it's just, and it's kind of amazing. Like, maybe it's a product of the sport and the way that they're coached not to ever say anything. But like 7 years into Dwayne Wade's career, I kind of knew who Dwayne was. I don't know anything about Ryan Tannehill.
As the Balls Cast people would say, he's vegetable lasagna.
Vegetable lasagna, man. And he's somebody else now. He's going to be.
Yeah, and really part of that is his own doing because he and his wife are intensely private people. Mm-hmm. And I think that, it's fully understandable. We're not casting judgment on these people as humans. Okay, we're just saying, why aren't you more iconic as a sports figure? Mm-hmm. If you're an intensely private person and you don't like to speak out that much and you don't like to let the cameras into your lives that much, then that's not going to happen. And yeah, I think he is just going to kind of melt away to some other team, just like Chad Henne did, except it just took longer. Chad Henne, they got him in the second-round pick, so maybe that's why it didn't take as long. It only took 4 years instead of 7. But I say that. But yeah,
but it seemed like forever. But like Ryan was twice as long. Like I think it was actually our colleague over at Ballscast, Chris Joseph, who penned the nickname "the Robot" for Henne. Like that was their thing on that Fin Nation site, which we're gonna actually stupidly try to recreate on 5 Reasons.
Oh, we really?
When it launches, I think I'm gonna get Roger back involved in it with Chris.
Well, that's great news because I loved that site.
Oh, that was fantastic. I mean, well, the whole we are all Ray Fenga and everything else. Yeah. I mean, that was how I got to know Chris. But yeah, I think I was the only media member who read it, actually. Right? but yeah, he penned him the robot, and it was right. And then it's like they found another robot, a later edition robot, who lasted 3 more years. I will say that, at least they have longevity going for them. But it's just, I come back to it, and I think this is a good place to close. I'm at this bowling thing today, which I blew it, by the way. There were 50 teams entered in OJ's tournament. He had a great turnout. We finished second because my 4 teammates all averaged in the two games about 230, and I averaged 115. So
wow.
we averaged. I'm usually about 130 to 150, but today was not good. We averaged, so we lost by 20 pins from winning the whole damn thing because of me. But I'm looking around and I'm just seeing every lane had a really impressive celebrity except mine, which because and I'm looking around and I'm thinking these guys are like they've had talent. Like there've been good players who've come through here.
Yeah. And
it's amounted to nothing. I'm looking at Vernon Carey 3 lanes down for me, right? I'm looking at they had good, Timbo, years and years and years of service for this organization, right? He looks great, by the way. He's lost about 40 pounds. And I'm looking around and I'm just like, so much talent squandered, so many years squandered. If it takes them a couple of years to get it right, I'm okay with it. I just don't know how many Dolphin fans are going to be. And that's to me, that's going to be the really interesting test. All right, catch CK on his usual podcast, 3 yards per carry. He is there every week with Alfredo and with Simon. Simon, who hates my work, so you can hear him on there killing me on a regular basis. And they both hate Alfredo, so it's really fun. So check them out on 3 yards per carry, and I'll be back with Chris later in the week. The other Chris, Winningham, one of our 12 Chris's.
Thank you for listening to the Fire Ringer podcast. Thank you so much.